Welcome to Cultivated Live for Wednesday, November 20th. My name is Jay Rosenthal. I'm the co-founder of Cultivated Media, the host of this program, Cultivated Live. And since we launched, our goal at Cultivated has been to be cannabis industry first, providing you with the most important, insightful, useful, and timely information every single day. We do that through our daily newsletter, which is called Cultivated Daily, which you can get at cultivated.news. We do that through this daily live stream called Cultivated Live. So we would love if you follow us on LinkedIn, subscribe to us on YouTube, and most importantly, get our newsletter in your inbox every single morning at 7:01, usually, Eastern Time. Get it at cultivated.news. Today, we have a special program. Jeremy, my co-founder and our editor-in-chief, we are joined by Damian Fagon. He is the Chief Equity Officer of the Office of Cannabis Management in New York. And we've been eagerly awaiting this conversation, Damian. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. Outgoing Chief Equity
Outgoing.
Officer.
I didn't know what the right term was. Outgoing, bag packing. I don't know what the right term is, but
the bags are packed. The bags are packed.
John Denver, your bags are packed. You're ready to go. The last day is when? I think it's November 29th?
Yeah, it's next week sometime. November 29th.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, let's get to it. Jerry, you want to kick it off?
Yeah, sure. So obviously, Damian, we got a lot to talk about. Let's start on the good stuff, right? Like, you just put up a piece for Marijuana Moment about, the bullishness, I guess, to use the industry term, about the New York cannabis industry over the next year. Talk about what you're excited about. Let's start there for the next year.
I mean, that article, I think it was important to get out. The last 6 months have been tough for New York cannabis. And I think a lot of it, unfortunately, has focused on interpersonal political fights that have nothing to do with the well-being of the program. And a lot of that is on, us. There was shots being taken on both sides. This industry matters to a lot of people. And I think that there's a lot of emotions in New York tied up around it, and doing it right and doing justice by the people that legalization was intended to benefit. But, at the end of the day, one of the biggest casualties of that fighting is that no one's talking about what's happening with the program. And the program is working. I think that there's a lot of evidence that the structure, the foundation is, strong. And I think the article really tries to highlight why it's strong. One of the best things to come out of New York cannabis, this whole rollout, is equity. There's been a lot of trouble with licensing compliance, a lot of challenges with litigation, but there's no doubting that it's a diverse, equitable market that put people who were harmed by the war on drugs first, and they stand to benefit the most at this juncture. This is the fastest growing market in the state right now. It'll triple in size in the next 12 to 18 months. And a majority of those sales will go through stores that were owned by people who had marijuana-related convictions. So I'm really proud of that, and I wanted to highlight it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And certainly over the past 6 months, as you said, even as new details are coming out of the size, scope, and success of the market, the 12 months prior to that were slower than I think many anticipated, which I think is a fair criticism as well. But as you look at the sort of zoom out of the past 6 months, but even beyond that, going backwards, how do you address sort of the thoughts that people thought it was rolling out too slowly? Was it a factor of this was a new market, they always roll out slower than expected? Or was it you were putting in place the foundations to be successful in these specific ways on into the future, or a little bit of both?
It's all of that. I think that if I was to take, to look at the agency and say why, what fault lies with the agency on the slowness? And I think, biting off more than you can chew is a fair thing to say about how New York State approached legalizing cannabis. There were times in the office where, there were 7 fires to put out simultaneously while we're also trying to do long-term planning for a multi-billion-dollar industry. And at the staffing rates we were at back then, there were people in the office till 11 o'clock every night working, or just sending emails really late. And it was unsustainable. And I think that it did come to a head when we opened up general licensing, which just compounded how much, and this actually just gets down to something that I wrote about in the social equity plan, and it's something I learned about the San Francisco cannabis rollout. the city in the San Francisco case, the city just did not put enough funding into the administrative institutional strength of their regulatory agency to handle what happened. And so licensing in San Francisco, social equity licensing specific, took 2 years to get out. And I remember writing about that and researching it in the social equity plan, hoping hope that doesn't happen to us. And it's just really hard to anticipate what that paperwork looks like, what the logistics of rolling these markets out looks like in advance. We had a lot of estimates. We obviously were requesting more staff. And if you know anything about the civil service in Albany, it is an incredibly difficult thing to hire people, retain people. Sometimes people need to take exams that are annual to get even hired. The institutional capacity of the agency just did not match up with what we actually had to get done. And the people got hurt because of that. And I think that unfortunately, if a lot of the litigation hadn't happened and, we were staffed appropriately, a lot of the stuff we're seeing now in the market would have happened a year ago. And it would have been a lot more in line with what people anticipated the market, at the speed at which the market being launched.
Damian, what are the challenges, or can you talk about the challenges with being sort of a startup agency, within the bureaucracy of New York State, right? Because I think a lot of lawmakers look at cannabis legalization and think that they're just going to flip a switch. But, those of us who have been covering the industry, operating in the industry, and even as regulators, we know that this is really difficult. So talk about some of the challenges with just standing up the agency. And, oh, by the way, you have this big goal of sort of being a piece of righting the wrongs of the war on drugs, right? That's more than just setting up a regulated market. So can you talk about the structure of how that's been difficult, like you touched on?
One of the things I'll talk about is the culture of agencies. I started my career in government in the Department of Justice in the State Department. I saw firsthand, what the federal government back then, this is 2012 to 2015, what they felt about drug policy. We relied on a lot of other agencies to get things done, including DASNY. And, this is not pointing fingers at individuals or agencies overall, but there are people in New York State government who don't want to work in legal weed. And when the state legalized cannabis, it necessitated a lot of people who weren't necessarily maybe not supportive of this rollout having to now add this to their portfolio of projects. And what I will say is that there was absolutely resistance, in some cases, in various cases, just for, pushing paperwork faster, getting things done. A lot of Albany, people have their job, their government job, they have their tasks. And when you add on something like cannabis, which now requires all this legal work, all this administrative work, and people didn't get raises to do that, they didn't hire more people to do that, there's just naturally going to be resistance. Like, I didn't sign up for this, I didn't vote for this, I'm going to move this at the regular speed it should be moved. And that's just the nature of bureaucracy. Unfortunately, it also includes some personal opinions about drug policy and maybe how the market was being rolled out. But yeah, I think that there's institutional resistance to stuff like this just organically in across all government.
Well, you bring up an interesting point, right, with cannabis, because this isn't just like a new thing you're regulating. Like, there's a lot of emotion behind it, right? For communities harmed by prohibition, for people that want to access the industry, for legacy market growers. Like, there's so much emotion wrapped up in this. Like, how do you manage that at the beginning when, like, yes, it is emotional, but also, like, we have to get these licenses issued, we have to get these regulations looked at. Like, there is nuts and bolts we have to do as well.
Yeah, and one of the most foundational experiences I had as chief equity officer was the community roundtables, where we spent about 4 months going around the state talking to 40 different community groups about cannabis legalization, and it was a listening tour. We were just listening. In a lot of cases, we were getting screamed at. People like a foot away from our face, just like, this is the government coming to tell you, sir, who was arrested 6 times for cannabis, who, wasn't able to see your kid while you were in prison. I'm telling you now, hey, we're legalizing. What do you think about that? It did not go over well in a lot of cases. And understandably. And I remember thinking at the time, like, man, their expectations, which are driven primarily by emotions, in a lot of cases, are not going to match up well with the slow-moving bureaucracy of New York State government. And you can see that coming like a train. It speaks to overpromising. The MRTA is a transformative legislative document. The government is not a transformative organization. It doesn't deliver transformative change at a quick pace. So the language of the MRTA and the capacity of the government, I think, are two separate things that, in the middle of that was a very emotional community of people who loved and cared about cannabis, who cared about their communities, who wanted justice done, who wanted to start making money. And there was this tiny agency of 150 people caught in the middle of that.
Right.
I love the work. I love those community roundtables. It's probably the most inspired I've been in this work since I started like 10 years ago. But it was incredibly challenging and incredibly intimidating, the scale of the challenge in front of us and the emotional investment of the wider New York communities.
Jeremy, if I might butt in for a second,
Yeah,
Damian, certainly New York is the biggest market to try to balance these things, right? Legalization, social equity, social justice, creating a massive market, doing it quickly, sort of pushing a bureaucracy to be faster, all those things. Like, what advice would you have for places like Minnesota, which are trying to balance similar things on a similar timeline, albeit a smaller state? Or what thoughts do you have for places like Florida, which have which are trying to do it completely differently? Like, what is the balance that you would recommend states take as they sort of approach this issue with all the same sort of emotion, but also business considerations and market considerations and legalization efforts and pace which they want to do it? Like, what are if folks are coming to you, what are you telling them about what went right and wrong in New York?
So, fully fund and fully support with enough staffing the start of the industry. Like, a lot of people don't understand how OCM was funded to begin all this, but we were lent. I mean, the agency was lent money by state government. All the money that the agency's been spending is actually a loan from the government that will need to be paid back in tax revenues generated by the agency. There has yet to be any, substantive financial commitment from the state into this rollout. If all that money that was going to the agency needs to be paid back in the tax revenue generated, the other 150 million that we were going to get for card is from the private sector. So, right off the bat, like, we weren't really committed. We weren't, to financially, administratively. I don't think it was on necessarily the best footing. And I think that's a real shame. And I think my advice to them is that, like, especially if you're doing reparative justice, who caused the harm? The state government did. The private sector had nothing to do with this, in a lot of ways. I mean, they obviously supported the politicians who did it, but a restorative justice program that is, contingent on harm done through arrests. You're looking at government to start footing the bill and investing in this space in a reparative way. And what I would say to those new states that are coming online is, like, this money will come back to you 3, 4, 5-fold. If you do it right at the start, if you put up, the 200, 300 staff members you need, you're going to have a smooth rollout. You're going to generate tax revenue faster. And it's going to be more equitable. It's going to be more successful. You're going to have a lot more. It's going to pay dividends off honestly for generations if you get it right at the jump. And that involves putting up money for it.
Damian, let's talk about one, like, on the emotional question. In the early-ish days of the MRTA, of the legal cannabis program, to be honest, there was some messaging that raised alarm bells in my head as a journalist, and sometimes, like, journalists are a bit cynical, right?
What?
Yeah, go figure. But it was this idea that was espoused that the New York cannabis industry could promise folks generational wealth, right? And I it could certainly promise some people more money, but regardless of where you're from, I think, to me, that messaging is what led to maybe a lot of disappointment. And I know
Yeah.
People are smart, right? Like, just because you haven't run a business before doesn't mean you don't understand how debt works and interest payments and all these things, right? Like people get that, but at the same time, it felt like that was setting up a lot of disappointment for people. So I guess my question is, like, do you think that messaging was a mistake? Would you do it again? Not you specifically, but the OCM, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, like, listen, this is not something new in cannabis. The green rush, which is, I think in a lot of ways over, has been a feature of the market for a decade now. Everyone has been talking about generational wealth, including in the press. I think, it really depends on how you define generational wealth, because one of the ways, and this is probably to your point, something that I did not articulate publicly as well as I should have. My parents own a small business. They've had a newspaper, a small two community newspapers in DC for 50 years now. We were never rich, but we had an asset that made us important in our community, that allowed us to meet with local businesses and local elected leaders. And it's still paying the salaries of 10 people who work for us, and there were a ton of problems with it. Tax payment issues. It almost went under multiple times. Obviously, the newspaper industry, physical newspaper industry, is a very difficult one.
Not a good one. Yeah.
I would still call that generational wealth. And it's not. We weren't millionaires. In a lot of ways, when we talk about generational wealth in the framework of the MRTA, there are dispensaries that are there are dispensaries that are making millions of dollars right now. They're owned by people who did access that generational wealth. There are dispensaries who are breaking even. Which is probably a lot of them, I would say. That's still wealth. That is an asset that they own, that eventually they, if they don't want to run it, they can sell it. And if they want to take, they can use it to leverage to create another business. They can also, just that proximity to running a small business, their families are now involved in building that business. They're engaging with accounting, with taxes, with payroll. There are all these things that I think generational wealth, like that terminology that makes it seem like you're all going to be millionaires. We're all going to basically win the lottery. No. We're all going to do a lot of hard work and have something a foundation of something that we can build off of. So I think that wasn't explained appropriately. We were creating a small business supply chain. We were not licensing 10 people to become millionaires overnight. I do absolutely think that was, misunderstood and mischaracterized at the beginning of the process.
Yeah. And then I guess looking back, like, I want to expand that question out different. Like, when you look back on your tenure, given, and correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is the equity position is going to change very much in the OCM going forward. Like, what would you have done differently, outside of all the outside forces that buffeted you, lawsuits and things? Like, at the beginning, what would you have done differently to set up specifically the equity office for success at the OCM?
Oh, the equity office specifically. That is a big question.
Yeah.
Wow. What would I have done differently with the equity program? I know I honestly, like, these questions drive me crazy because there's probably a million things.
No, but I'm interested. So yeah. Take your time. Yeah.
Well, one thing I'll talk about is this. Talk about the thing that led to a lot of issues that I ended up having, which is compliance. I did orient the equity program and equity largely to include some elements of compliance. And it's in the C plan. And that is primarily just because I've been in the industry. I've talked to equity licensees who tell me that these compliance requirements are overbearing and they're on risk of losing their license. And I'm a first-time business, all these things. If you're going to bring people into a compliance-heavy industry and you're not ready to train them how to understand compliance or whatever, like, to me, it was always an equity issue, compliance. These people could lose their licenses for making a mistake. And ultimately, and eventually, that led to me talking to licensees about their compliance issues, which was an issue. And I think that part of my team envisioned a scenario where compliance wasn't this terrifying thing that all licensees were scared of. It was actually much more interactive. So we could get to a place where, like, we were talking about consumer safety and both the agency and the licensee understood why they were doing this, and not that like we were trying to just take money from them. And it really just can't be that. I think that we found that out the hard way. I actually got a call from some regulators out in California who said at the start of their rollout, they also, for the first 2 years, were constantly talking to farmers. They were going out to these communities, having big workshop meetings for the first 2 years. And after 2 years, they stopped completely, cut off all dialogue with farmers because it was getting out of control. There were issues, obviously, in California's rollout with too many growers and not enough retailers. And it was just becoming litigious. It was, the staff, it just was not working. And I just think that was, I really wish I could have like walked that fine line a little bit better, because I do think that there is a much better industry in the future where we treat cannabis like tomatoes or coffee. And it isn't this, nuclear fallout like waste that you have to like hide from the public and like put in safe vans to get to the, you know what I mean? Like, which it is now. Like, when I first got there and I started looking at the regulations, we had a regulation that you couldn't see, if you grew cannabis outdoors, you couldn't see it from the highway. My first thing I remember writing a comment on it, like, is the cannabis going to shoot you? Like, I just don't understand. And, I really wish we had done a better job at like challenging the stigma, normalizing compliance, making it less burdensome and scary for licensees and in an equitable way. And I think that's something I would have oriented differently at the start of my tenure.
Yeah, that's fair.
So I have to do my journalistic due diligence. We got to ask about the OGS report, the allegations in there. I mean, I guess just to start off, like, I know you're on your way out. Let me think about a good way to ask this. Like, in terms of the specific allegations that put you on leave, like, we want to provide you a venue to share your side of the story. Let's start with that.
But listen, this is the part of this stuff that I don't want to distract from the program. But in this case specifically, like, the next chief equity officer does need to know how this went down. I think that the supply chain does deserve to know how this happened. When I was put on leave, I was communicated that there was an investigation into these allegations. I didn't receive another communication for the office for 5 months. Despite my, like, can we finish the investigation now so I may leave? Like, the part of the issue with me was that, like, I can't have this investigation hanging over me. You have to complete this investigation so I can get out of here. And there was just no response for 5 months. And this is where it gets insane to me. I had to get lawyers. Lawyers sent the agency emails, formal letter, demanding to know the status of the investigation, what was going on. The investigation was completed 2 weeks later. And then I was brought in to the offices. Again, this is 6 months of me just like, I was training for a half marathon. I was getting a full-time. It was a waste of money and time and resources.
Right.
I show up to the office and I meet with the interim director and executive director, and they give me these investigation reports that say I did absolutely nothing wrong and that I should report back to work. In fact, they did one investigation. The IG obviously did their investigation and cleared me to return to work. The agency then commissioned a second investigation into me from OGS, who also cleared me to return to work. I was then informed that if I chose to return to work, there would be further investigations done by the Cannabis Control Board and public hearings where everything would be on the table. It was obscene. I came there to just clear my name and leave. And I ended up getting threatened further. And I say all this not to like cause a bunch of drama, but none of this was necessary. Like, none of it. It was such a distraction. It was so pointless. The allegations were always, everyone involved at the office, in the governor's office, knew that those allegations never happened. There was litigation involved. So this information was already circulating in the agency that I had nothing to do. I couldn't ever tell compliance what to do. They would have immediately reported me if I tried to. And so, yes, this was a 6-month distraction that I think worked to the benefit of the governor's office in their efforts to take over the agency. I was a casualty of that. And I probably was a casualty of that because I'm not from Albany, don't have a lot of political allies. I was a farmer and a nonprofit worker. I was easy to scapegoat in this manner. And, I say all that because, come on, focus on the program. Like, I could have left 5 months ago. You could have got a new chief equity officer by now. It did not need to happen like this. I just think it was just a huge pointless distraction and a waste of taxpayer money.
How much of that, I mean, I guess we call it intra Albany infighting. Like, how much of that, in your view, came from Governor Hochul's office and the executive chamber? Like, how much of that was
all of it?
Yeah,
it was all of it. And I mean,
yeah. Sorry, go ahead. I mean, I guess I'm trying to get at, like, in your view, is this sort of like a power play?
Yeah, and I think that my shock to this whole situation was that I'm from the federal government. Like, I was at DOJ.
Yeah.
I was in the criminal division at DOJ. I'm calling my mentors who are like former AUSAs, like, what are they doing? I think that this is actually, for people who are used to Albany, the norm. I think that the previous administration behaved this way pretty regularly, probably in much more brutal fashion. And I think that a lot of those habits carried over to the current administration. And I think this is a way of doing business in Albany. I think a lot of it has to do with lobbyists, power, perceived power, public relations. I mean, a lot of what I saw on a day-to-day basis throughout my work in Albany is that it is really just trying to shape the narrative that the public sees. It is a big comms effort to plug programs, to deny allegations, to change how people view the work that they're doing. And, you know, I was just rolled into that as someone who was a good example of like why this needs to happen. We'll look at what they're doing. You know what I mean? It was just that. And I don't know, DC's different. DC's ugly. So I was born and raised in Capitol Hill. My dad's 40 years at the SEC. All my friends are at state or DOJ and on the Hill. Like, so I'm not unfamiliar with politics. I think that this was a little grosser to me than I'm used to, is what I'll say.
Jeremy gets to ask the hard questions. I get to ask the easy ones. So your last day, I think, is next week on the 29th. I think you said. Like, what is next for Damian Fagon, or are you not talking about it yet?
I mean, honestly, like, so I was just talking to. I've been having these conversations a lot. Like, you're staying in the industry, or you're doing this, you're doing that. Like,
well, on your long runs.
Yeah, on my long runs, dude. Yo, I trained for a half marathon while this was all happening, and I love running now. Like, I feel like such a New York City loser who just fell into. I loved it. It was incredible, especially combined with cannabis. Holy, like, cannabis and running. My God, I had no idea.
Runner's high. There you go.
Runner's high. To that, I will say that, you know, I've always loved cannabis. I love this industry. But, you know, I also just have like a personal relationship with the plant myself that I like really appreciate. I've had it my whole life. I like to grow it. I like home grow, like either home grow or with a farm. And I like to consume it. And I feel like this experience has really like negatively colored my relationship with cannabis. And I do feel an urge to step away from the industry, largely just because, like, to maintain my closeness with the plant. Like, my relationship with cannabis is so much deeper than like the politics of all of this. Obviously, I love this industry that we've created. I love our licensees. I think if anything got me through the last 6 months, it was watching all these card stores open. I've just been blown away. Like, I knew a lot of these people at the start of this, and there are people opening stores that I never would have anticipated would get this together, and they did. Including, like, there's some coming in the next 2 months, guys that I'm just like, I'm messaging them like, I'm so proud of you. I can't believe you're doing this. That I love. And I will stay in the industry in that regard. Like, you know, before all this happened, I was doing this mostly as like an activist on the side and doing my main job at a nonprofit in workforce development. I would much prefer to return to that kind of engagement with the supply chain, where it is just something that I'm passionate about and knowledgeable about and will help people figure it out. But no, it's not where I'm working full time. Yeah.
Well, we have an interview coming up. I think it's tomorrow with someone who follows the DC cannabis market closely. There's lots of chaos going on down there as well, just with the
I imagine
licensees and the gifting shops and the hemp stores, and they're all basically suing each other.
I feel like people should know that, since I am from DC, like, my first legal purchase was at one of those gift shops in DC. Like I was just like, I remember the day they decriminalized it, and I was just like, wait a second. And I smoked like a joint on the street outside of like near the White House, and I was just like, this is insane. This is the craziest thing I've ever done. But yeah, DC is the birthplace of the illicit shop. I mean, the gift shop.
Yeah, and it's well, apparently like a couple hundred are still going pretty strong, according to the regulator down there, and according to the licensed medical operators who would like them all to shut down. But different story, different day, but also compelling to watch. I want to thank you, Damian, for making time for the candid conversation that we've had. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Good luck as the bags are packed and you head out next week. We look forward to connecting with you as the next chapter unfolds as well. And thanks for making time.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Damian.
Thank you.
Join us back here tomorrow at the same time. We'll be joined by Josh Schiller from the lawsuit, another lawsuit against the federal government. We'll be getting an update from him.
I got triggered.
Sorry. Sorry. We look forward to connecting with you. So it's back here tomorrow, LinkedIn, YouTube, on Jeremy's X, Twitter handle as well. That'll be 10 a.m. Eastern as well. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow.